One cold evening in Moscow, a man stepped up to a car with American diplomatic license plates, tapped on the window, and slipped a folded note inside. Then he turned and walked away into the dark. The note was an offer to spy for the United States against his own country, and the response from the CIA was to do nothing. They were certain it was a trap, so they ignored him. For nearly 2 years, this same man kept trying, approaching American cars, passing notes, taking enormous risks. And for nearly 2 years, America kept turning him away, never realizing they were rejecting the most valuable spy they would ever have inside the Soviet Union. His name was Adolf Tolkachev, and the secrets he carried would be worth, quite literally, billions of dollars. This is the story of the billion-dollar spy, the quiet engineer who handed America a decade-long head start over the Soviet military, and the betrayal from inside America's own ranks that sent him to an execution cell. Adolf Tolkachev was not a soldier, and he was not trained as a spy. He was an engineer, one of the very best in the Soviet Union. He worked at a top-secret military aviation institute in Moscow, where he helped design the radar systems that sat in the nose of the Soviet Union's most advanced fighter jets. That job gave him access to some of the most closely guarded secrets in the entire Soviet arsenal, the blueprints for how Soviet warplanes would see, track, and kill in a war. And Adolf Tolkachev had quietly decided that he wanted to give all of it away. He was not doing it for money, at least not at first. Tolkachev despised the Soviet system. He had watched it crush its own people for decades, and somewhere along the way, he made a private, deliberate decision to fight back in the only way a man in his position ever could, by handing its deepest secrets to its greatest enemy. But this was not a clean act of conscience from a safe distance. He had a wife and a teenage son at home. Every photograph he took, every meeting he kept put their lives in danger too. He knew exactly what the Soviet state did to traitors. He decided to do it anyway. When the CIA finally decided to take the risk, they did it carefully. Tolkachev and his handlers communicated through a quiet, deadly serious choreography of signals, a chalk mark left in the right place, an object set down just so, a phone that rang a single time and went dead. The actual street meetings lasted only minutes, every second of them shadowed by the blanket of KGB surveillance that covered Moscow. One slip, one tail not spotted, and it would all be over, for him and for the Americans standing beside him. Once the CIA finally accepted that he was real, around 1979, Tolkachev became one of the boldest spies of the entire Cold War. He was given a tiny camera, small enough to hide in the palm of his hand, and he used it to photograph thousands of pages of classified documents. He would sign secret files out of his institute's library, carry them back to his office, lock the door, and photograph them, page after page after page, then return the originals as if nothing had ever happened. To help him move documents past security, the CIA even forged him a fake building pass. Over the next several years, in around 21 carefully planned street meetings, he passed his handlers a mountain of Soviet military secrets. And what secrets they were. Tolkachev handed over the inner workings of Soviet airborne radar, the guidance systems of their air-to-air missiles, and the designs of the radars built into frontline fighters like the MiG-29 and the Su-27. Some of it a full 10 years before those systems were even finished. For the United States, it was a once-in-a-generation windfall. American engineers suddenly knew exactly what the Soviets could and could not do in the sky, and they could quietly design their own weapons to defeat them. American pilots who would one day fly against Soviet jets were, in a sense, already training against an enemy whose hand had been read. When the U.S. Air Force later studied everything he had delivered, they reached a staggering conclusion. His intelligence had saved the United States somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 billion in weapons research. That single number is where his nickname was born, the billion-dollar spy. By the early 1980s, Adolf Tolkachev may have been the single most productive intelligence source the CIA had anywhere on Earth. But the more he gave, the more dangerous his life became. He was careful and he was disciplined, and for years his discipline kept him alive. In the end, it would not be a mistake of his that destroyed him. It would be a betrayal, and it would come from inside American intelligence itself. There were two men. The first was Edward Lee Howard, a CIA officer who had actually been trained for a posting to Moscow, then fired by the agency after he failed a polygraph and his life collapsed into drinking and petty crime. Bitter and burned, Howard reportedly made contact with the KGB and told them what he knew. And what he knew included the existence of a priceless American source buried inside Soviet military aviation. The second was Aldrich Ames, a CIA officer who had secretly sold himself to the KGB for cash and who betrayed America's agents by the handful. One of the names that leaked to Moscow, almost certainly, was Tolkachev's. In June of 1985, the trap closed. Tolkachev was seized by the KGB as he drove back into Moscow from the countryside. Soon after, a CIA officer arriving for a meeting with him was arrested on the street, caught carrying concealed cameras and spy equipment. The Soviets kept the arrest secret for months, quietly using their captured channel to feed the CIA false information, before the truth finally surfaced. Adolf Tolkachev was put on trial, convicted of treason, and in 1986 he was executed. He had risked everything, for years, knowing with grim clarity how it would most likely end. When he was arrested, he was found with millions of rubles he had been paid but had barely spent because the money had never really been the point. And today, in the headquarters of the CIA in Langley, Virginia, a single painting hangs on the wall. It is the portrait of a balding, bespectacled Soviet engineer, the only Russian agent ever honored that way inside American intelligence. The man America almost threw away turned out to be the most valuable spy it ever had, and the secrets he carried out of Moscow, one roll of film at a time, were worth more than anyone on either side of the Cold War ever imagine.